Well, I got to say that on Wednesday, Bill and I had the opportunity to join a bunch of other XR innovators up at Western Technical College at the
Right.
the first annual XR Summit at Western Technical College. And Bill gave a keynote presentation and absolutely knocked it out of the park. It was totally awesome. And I learned that Bill was once upon a time a snake breeder.
Yes. Yes. And as I
So
had
I'm
to
just,
mention, as I had to mention in the speech itself, I wasn't actually a breeder. I just introduced them. So
you
uh,
just introduced us.
Okay, you're more of a dating service for
I
snakes.
was I was I was the snake matchmaker. Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh
See,
my
Dina's
goodness.
here. Let me see. I always hate to bug people if they join, if they just want to stay in the background, but I will invite Deanna to speak if she would like to. So you are welcome to join us. If not, you can stay anonymous and quiet if you'd like. That's totally fine too.
Welcome, Dan.
Welcome to Acadicus Simulation Pulse Live every Friday at noon Central. Yeah, we were just talking about Western Technical's XR Summit. It was great. We had a presentation
Yeah.
by Carly Brady, also from Madison College, talked about how to fund a VR lab. Did a great job on her presentation. Kevin Dean from Western Technical gave the opening remarks and did a great job and had a lot of great insights into their use of VR. It was interesting to hear their perspective and how it's similar and different than some of the other programs that we've heard using it. And Jamie Howell gave a talk about how they're set up with their VR lab and her experience getting that set up. And one of the cool analogies that she made was she talked about as if it's cooking, like making a soup. And she said, there's a lot of VR applications that are like buying a can of chicken noodle, Campbell's chicken noodle soup. And if that's what you want, something real simple and easy, you just open it up, put it in the microwave, and you're done. There's a lot of applications that can do that for you. But she likes to make a gourmet soup and make it, customize it and make it special and add her own special ingredients, and that Acadicus is a way to do that. So I thought that was a great insight because we do have the scene editing tools and the sandbox and the library of all the content, and
Mhm.
it's up to you what you build with it. And she also raised a good point that we also have the Campbell soup. If you just want to run an off-the-shelf simulation, we got plenty of standalone self-guided simulations in Acadicus too, but at least you have the capability to roll up your sleeves and add in some spices and other ingredients. So she talked in her presentation, used that analogy throughout. So she talked about the ingredients of building her VR lab, the PCs that they use, the lessons that they learned along the way, all the different things that went into building their VR lab, which is really cool. I didn't get her permission to share pictures, nor did I get permission from everybody that was in the labs when they came on the tour. So I'm not going to share that, although it's so tempting. I've got some great videos. But and it was also interesting. Just to complete the circuit here, we had Kim Ernsmeer gave a presentation on the OpenRN project, and now this has been almost 5 years in the books
Wow.
now. So she's got a lot of data on the efficacy of the VR simulations that we built for OpenRN that are now available, open source scenarios, and also the content in Acadicus is all shared. So there's a lot of nursing programs that are now leveraging those textbooks, that content, those virtual simulations. And it was really cool to see the insights that they've gained from, that amount of experience, now that it's been out there for that many years. So that was pretty cool. And then we concluded with a panel of experts, including Bill Ballo, Carly Brady. Kim had to leave at that point, but Jamie and Kevin Dean were on that as well and talked about one of the main things that came up was this sort of idea. A lot of the schools that were all the schools that were there were from the Western or Wisconsin technical colleges system. So, what are some ways that they could be working together more or comparing notes? Because even for me, even though, we're providing the software there, I was hearing things people were talking about that they were doing and building and running simulations. I had no idea. And it really seemed like a missed opportunity to not be more interconnected and comparing notes and sharing resources. And so
Mhm.
that was one of the themes that kept coming up over and over and over is how do we work together more? So that was pretty cool. And yeah, so it was I just think I'll stop rambling here in a minute, but the main thing that I took away from it was this felt a lot like what an Acadicus user convention might be like in the early days. It was a lot of
Mhm.
Acadicus users. I think there were only two people there that aren't current active users of Acadicus. Everybody else was,
Mm.
which blew me away. Like when they first asked Kevin asked the question, like how many people are using Acadicus, and everybody's hands went up except two people. It was just whoa. So when we went up to the lab, it wasn't as much about like, here's how you use the controllers and here's how you put on a headset. These were the power users. These are the people who are running the simulations and they're very familiar with it. So it was more about like, well, when I run simulations, I always go like this, or I always do this first, or here's how I show how to use the controllers. And I make sure that we, put the mat in this position. It was really cool to hear all of these technicians, essentially these faculty instructors, talking about how they run simulations in their program. So it was a really cool experience. I was honored to be there. It was a great opportunity to network with fellow Acadicus users, and looking forward to the next one for sure. But Bill crushed that keynote, and I did not know he was a snake breeder. That was, I think, one of the highlights of the day, and we kept
Thank
on
you.
using it. It was like it became kind of the meme of the entire
It
conference was
did.
Bill was a snake breeder.
Yeah. It got
So
into everything. It got into everything. We just kept talking about it.
Oh,
yeah, that was fun.
you're gonna have that attached to you for a while, Bill.
Yep. Yep. Well, and the sort of the whole idea of the keynote was, success from failure, right? So, I mean, I can come in and tell everybody about all of the things that we do at Madison, and I can tell them all about, the stuff that we do in the XR Center and how we built our XR Center and all the people that were involved and all the components and all of that. But there's a lot of those stories. There's plenty of those stories out there. What I get from a lot of faculty is this feeling as though they just don't know what to do and they can't do it. They just like they're overwhelmed. They just don't know. They just don't get it. They get it, but they don't necessarily know how they're going to use it. And so what I wanted to do was, instead of just coming in and saying, here's all the cool stuff we do, and everybody going, there's no way we can get to that level. We're nowhere near that. Like, yeah, no, of course you aren't, and that's okay. That's fine. You shouldn't be. We've been on it for 5 years, and you're a year in, and you're struggling where we were a year in. And that's kind of what I went back to, is like, the struggles that I had. But even so much that I had my high school transcript and my college transcripts, and all of that kind of stuff there, which got a lot of good laughs, because it took me 10 years at the 2-year college to get my degree. So that's the thing, and that's what I wanted people to understand, is that no matter where you're at, you just, as long as you're moving forward, you're going to get somewhere. So but yeah, the whole shtick about it too was, I got fired from the snake breeding job, and then we had to sit around and I told the story about why I got fired, and it just became this huge thing, and it was hilarious. And
It
you know
involves monkeys. I'll give you a clue. Monkeys were involved in it. So it's,
there were
yeah, the story
monkeys.
just, the plot thickens and
uh,
then it gets even thicker.
uh,
Yeah, it was
and
great.
as I'm driving home, I'm like, I could write a book off of the ridiculousness I've lived through. So just some of
It
the
was,
things that happened.
but it was great though, talking about that. I think it's something you're absolutely right. We hear it all the time where people come and they're like, "Well, I'm really late to this. I have no idea what we're doing. I have no idea how to set this up." And they feel intimidated like everybody else is already way ahead, but it's just not true. A lot of these programs, even the ones that are well established, are still just kind of finding their footing, and it's a whole new frontier that we're on here. We're introducing a virtual dimension to an existing incumbent methodology that's been around for decades and very well established with research. And we're just trying to introduce an extra dimension to that, but it's a whole new world. And so we're just figuring that out, and we're kind of realizing that there's things that we can do that we haven't been able to do with sim before. So one of the things that came up at the conference was sharing resources. Madison College has built a lot of content in Acadicus, and one of the cool things about the system is that content is shared with all the other schools. Every single school that joins Acadicus, every customer has access to all of that content. So there was a lot of talk about like the birthing mannequins are very heavy and they're difficult to transport. They're very, very expensive. And so, there was at one point a shared mannequin in the state. I think I understood the story properly that there was like one birthing mannequin and they would literally
Wow.
drive to like Eau Claire and La Crosse and take that mannequin. Well, now if you've got that birthing mannequin that was developed, by Madison College and scenarios developed by OpenRN, and there's just a lot of resources around that. Anybody that has a headset, you just put on a headset. Now you're at the birthing simulation, and it's interactive and more realistic in some ways, but not the haptic feedback. So you still need to do it, physically, but with the mannequin. But there's a lot of ways that we can augment and support that simulation. So shared resources, and then I think crossing again along the theme of crossing geographic boundaries, you're not sort of limited to just your own network in your own school. Like once you put the headset on, you can be standing face to face with Jamie Howell running a paramedic mass casualty scenario from hundreds of miles away. It would take you all day. Like just basically you'd have to drive all the way up there, all the way
Sure.
back, but you put on a headset, now you're in a simulation together. We're breaking down the boundaries of geography in the virtual world. So those are the kinds of interesting sort of things that were coming up quite a bit during the summit. So that was really interesting to hear.
What I thought was kind of neat too, John, is like when you and I went into the lab. So Jamie brought us, upstairs and into the lab and kind of said, "Okay, guys, here you go." That's kind of unique as well, right? Because like I walked in and it was like, okay, yeah, here's the headset, here's the computer. I'm just going to log into my Acadicus stuff and we're off and running. So I didn't have to be in my home lab. I was in order to feel like I was home, because all I did was just log in and go straight to what I normally do. And even being able to explain, okay, here's how you move around, here's how you get around with the controllers, all that kind of stuff, and do my normal thing, just do my normal thing, just like it was my lab, just like I was back at the XR Center at the college, and I was standing in Jamie's lab, and I was going through all of that. So I thought that was really neat and a really good point, in terms of like the power of Acadicus and just being able to obviously get together, but then I went over and I could essentially run Jamie's lab as well. So it was pretty neat.
Hey, you just logged into your own private lab and had access to all the simulations you've created and edited, and
Yeah,
that was really cool. And I think another side of that is that these were people who know what they're doing, but in VR, but also they know what they're doing because they're experienced professionals in their careers. That it was one of those scenarios like we saw when the Oregon EMS people came down, and when they put on the headset, it wasn't about like, oh, geez, what do I do? I don't know what to do. They were paramedics and they immediately got down and started bagging the patient and doing compressions, and they didn't have any hesitation whatsoever. They were just immediately on their hands and knees. And I saw that happening with these instructors too. You could tell that they were experienced nurses. There was one guy that was an experienced paramedic, and as soon as they put the headset on, and I think you brought them into
yeah,
Hector's
yeah,
room, and he's in there and they're just putting on a nasal cannula and they're turning the oxygen on. They're looking at the record and making sure that they're following the orders. And they were just taking care of that patient.
yeah,
Whereas when you get students in there, especially earlier, in their undergrad years, they're just sort of like, I don't know what to do. Like, and they're just kind of learning and they're figuring it out. Well, they're students, they don't have that, but these
right.
these experts just jump in and they're just right at it. And I just love seeing that.
Yeah, yeah. It was definitely a cool thing to see. It was definitely a cool thing to see. And one of the subjects that came up too was, outside. Have you gone to the exterior community and started to talk to the exterior community? And that's one of the things that Carly and I talked about a little bit, and I think we're probably going to talk about more, because when we're talking about funding those kind of things, like we can offer that to some people in our exterior community, right? To go out to some of these EMS agencies and say, hey, would you like to come to our XR center and, run scenarios here? We have this scenario, we have that, have their instructors come in, or have their educators come in and take a look at those kind of things, and then run some of that with us. And we offer a certain amount of help on it, or, a certain level of whatever their need might be. The other thing was that I talked about was like we'd run summer camps at the XR Center, and that actually went really well. That was another revenue source where we can have kids come to a summer camp. We ran 2 week summer camps, 2 1 week summer camps, one for middle schoolers and one for high schoolers, and they went really great. It was a lot of fun, and we got to do stuff that was outside of what our norm is. But I always fall back to Acadicus because I know that I can bring them in and show them cool things in Acadicus. That when we talking about revenue streams, because that was one of the big issues that came up. I think it was I don't remember who was at the front table there, but they were talking about revenue stream a lot. They were talking about funding a lot, and their concerns with funding, and how are they going to get one person to run it and those kind of things. So, and that's one of the ways to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, just even like you mentioned summer camps, I heard a lot from, well, Western in particular talked a lot about outreach, community outreach, and how they've been using, they'll go out and work with local EMS and police stations and fire safety, and they're bringing a, virtual simulation out to their those field locations. And it's been so successful that they've actually had to kind of pull back a little bit because now all these different organizations are like, yeah, come and do that with us, come and do that with us. And like that's a great place for a college like that to be, where they're really seeing the school as a resource that can help them with this aspect of it. So I think it wouldn't take much to transfer that into a revenue stream as well, because there's a certain amount of requirements for like ACLS training, and Bill, you can speak to that a lot better than I can, but there's a certain requirement for keeping that fresh, and you have to, there's a financial expense to that usually. And if you can do that with a virtual simulation and get everybody a lot more engaged and have all the aspects of virtual education go along with it, the higher retention, the greater engagement, I think there's going to be a lot of interest in that, and every school that's using it could effectively be doing that.
Yeah, I mean, American Heart even put out like ACLS for the experienced provider, right? And so, a person like myself, like my ACLS has expired, and I'm considering going back and getting it back because I'm considering doing some EMS instructing work. So what am I going to do? I'm going to take the one for experienced provider. So the whole idea is you take it online. It's an online course. You take it online, but then afterwards you have to go get skills checks. And so someone has to check your skills and say, yeah, yeah, you are definitely an experienced provider. Yep, you do know what you're doing, and do a checkoff for you. Well, if I have to go and grab a mannequin and grab this and grab okay, I got to get that monitor, and now I got to borrow all of this stuff to do those skills checkoffs, that can be a little difficult because, my EMS department is probably using it for their teaching. So if I'm trying to schedule a skills checkoff or something like that, that's going to be a little difficult to do. Well, VR can definitely take that place. And that is a really, really great place to start in terms of a gap fill. I think of virtual reality as more than just a gap fill, because I think I think in some ways it does have some superiority. There is a much higher benefit to virtual reality than there is to using just a rubber mannequin or something like that, or even a standardized patient. And so, the immersion in environment, those kind of things, those are all invaluable. And so that's where I think, some more growth could be. And that is a really good revenue stream to say, hey, we're going to do your skills checkoffs. We're going to do them all in virtual reality as well. And you're going to come in, you're going to get all those skills checked off, and we're going to make sure that you're good to go. And then we can report that back to the American Heart Association as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Did they record the session, guys? I mean, will that be something?
No, I
No.
really wish they would have, but they really, I questioned Jamie on that earlier on because I said, can I attend virtually? And she's like, no, we're going to get everyone together in person. We
Mhm.
need people to connect and build community. And at first I thought, well, that's a missed opportunity. But when we were there in person, I understood the wisdom of that, because it really did get people to join in person in a way that we just wouldn't have connected that way virtually. You just, there's just kind of magic missing when you shake someone's hand and you can spend an afternoon or a day talking to them. And yeah, I think that was really valuable. But
I
hope,
agree.
maybe in the future we could do like record it and share it asynchronously or something like that afterwards. But um,
It sounds like
yeah,
a great, yeah.
yeah. One of the things that Carly talked about, which I really think is something that anybody that's going to attend a simulation pulse or is interested in virtual simulation at all is going to be keyed into is how to fund VR. I think, whenever we do a demo, it generally it sells itself. We show what it does, we show
Mhm.
what the capabilities are, and I think almost everybody, with a few rare exceptions, everybody wants to buy it. The question is, how do we get the budget, right? That's the big issue. And so Carly talked a lot about her approach to that, which it was interesting because she talked about how to get buy-in from administrators. And she said, you don't just go in and make an ask for a big capital expense for something that they don't understand. She started out, working with Bill on something, much smaller, bite-sized pieces that address very specific needs in very specific programs, and then demonstrated the use of it on a very small level. They were talking about, I think they had like one or two laptops early on, and maybe like one of the headsets was like a borrowed headset that a faculty member brought in, but that's all they needed was to show, here's what this can do, here's what's possible, and then to really build the case for the value that it provides. And it's more a story about how valuable this is going to be. And once that story started to be told, then coming back in and making a capital expense request or going after grants and things like that made a lot more sense, because we know now why we want to do this. The why was established before the how. And I think that was something I think every program that's looking to fund this should think about, where it's like, don't just think about, I need to come up with $20,000. Just think about, where are the gaps in my program? Where are the opportunities? Where are there pain points in my program that I can use this technology to solve, and make a business case for it? Like, if we invest in this, in many cases, you can build an entire VR lab for less than the cost of one high fidelity mannequin. But
Yeah.
why would you do that? Why? So let's talk about the value proposition and then make that ask. It's going to be a lot easier at that point.
Well, and I think
Yeah.
that's good. And Bill, I'd be curious to understand, especially at your organization, where upper level leadership, because I feel like that's key here moving forward, right? We understand, and I think it's, to your point, John, easy to demonstrate just the effectiveness of VR in almost any uh, specialty, how it can change teaching and training. I mean, I think it's up there with the level of when we started using computers. I mean, seriously. But at some level, right, that's going to change the way you teach and train. And so now it becomes this tool that's essential for people to learn how to use, at the instructor level, certainly, but also at the student level. So at some point, right, there's this decision that has to be made. This has to be integrated into our curriculum somehow, so that becomes a basic skill set. And then it grows from that, over the period of time a student is there, right? That it gets to be used. And Bill, I'm wondering, have discussions like that been had at your organization? I mean, is there an understanding at upper level leadership that, wow, we're just, at the tip of the iceberg here about where this is going to go and what it's going to become?
Yeah, there definitely is. And there's some vision with our upper level management too, which is great. Because, sometimes it's hard, with upper level managers, they're looking at the 30,000-foot
Mhm.
view. And to really make them understand the sort of nuance that we're looking at here when it comes to VR and then the future. Um, One of the ways that Carly did it, which I think is brilliant, is our provost at the time was Dr. Trina Bakken, and she is very, very, very big into golf. Like, she loves golf. So what Carly and Alan did, this is before me. This is probably a year before me. Carly and Alan brought a headset in and had loaded a golf game onto it.
Great. That's awesome.
And that's it. That's it. So the key is you have to find out what the area of interest is for the person that you're going to be pitching this to. And this is what I do when I take people to lunch and we sit down and we talk and, you know, those kind of things. And I'm doing all of that sort of politic thing, is I'm trying to figure out what's their thing? What do they love? And that's what Carly did with Trina. And Trina immediately understood the impact of virtual reality. So, and this is back to when we hadn't even heard of Acadicus. Carly hadn't been to South by Southwest yet, or maybe she had at that point, but there wasn't that level of power that we have now. Now we're in a very good place. Now we're in a very good place because we are seen as sort of the hub for virtual reality, and in some ways, we're seen as the hub for technology. Because one of the other projects that I was working on is our Classroom Live project, where you can join from the class or join from home or, you know, whatever. And I had been working on that, well, for me since 2010, for the college since 2016. And that was so ridiculously taboo before the pandemic. Okay. I remember that I had been teaching from Florida because my dad had fallen and broken his hip. So I was teaching my class back to my classroom from Florida. All I had to do was have someone go in there and turn everything on for me. And my students loved it because they didn't want to lose me as their instructor. I was going to be down with my dad. There was no doubt about it. They didn't want to lose me. And so, but I remember making a pitch to the upper management about how important this technology was. And I was told, do not talk about how you taught from home. Don't. Or taught from Florida. Don't talk about that. That is not going to go over well. And I was like, interesting. Okay, I took all of those slides out because it wasn't going to go over well. Nowadays, if I said something like that, people go, oh, yeah, sure. We do that all the time. What are you talking about? But it took the pandemic for that to happen. Well, very similar happened with VR too, where people looked at it and was like, I don't know. And then all of a sudden, the pandemic comes along and they're like, oh, this could solve a problem. So that's why I sort of start off with that idea of gap fill, like what problems can you solve with it? And that's where then a lot of your funding and a lot of your understanding is going to come from, because managers, the one thing that managers have to do more than anything else is solve problems. And so if you can give them a solution to solving a problem, man, that's a great way to go. So yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about that and about the future of VR and how this really is the future. And luckily, it's been led by mostly myself and Carly, which is great.
One of the other things that I heard coming up along those lines is that, you know, it used to be about trying to convince the administrators and the faculty that this is something that's necessary, and then that was the main primary engine of the sale. But now some of the schools were talking about how it actually is in many of the demos that we're doing. What I hear when I say, what's bringing you to virtual reality, it's the students. The students are expecting it. Like our students are demanding this. Like they come in and they're like, why don't you have VR? Because it's just, they know they've already tried it. They've all got headsets at home. They're playing it all the time and they know how engaging it is. And then when they see the way things are done in simulation, they know that if this was in virtual reality, it would be, you know, there would be different benefits to it. So I thought that was kind of interesting that the students are kind of becoming this groundswell of like, the schools are becoming, are getting to be under some pressure that the students are expecting that. And one of the schools mentioned that when their older students are going in, you know, to the orientation in particular, we heard a lot of great things about the orientation experience. By the way, that was Rick. Everybody loves the experience and the recordings and everything. And they said that the students would come in and the graduate or the later undergrad students would take, you know, 20 minutes or so to go through it. But now the younger students that are just now entering the program, when they go through the orientation, they're through it in 5 minutes. They just blaze right through it. They don't need any, they already know how to do all the controllers and they're just going through it really fast. And they said they've already seen that in just a few years of change in the students getting younger, that the younger students coming in and just, they get it. They already know how to do it and they're just ready to go. So I think that's an interesting sign that this is here to stay and a pretty big opportunity to get those students engaged.
Well, I think about my own evolution about how I've used digital technology, right? And gone from computing to then I want everything on my phone to now, seriously, I spend the majority of my digital time in my headset. I come in and I put on my Quest, and that's where I'm looking at my email, and that's where I'm, browsing the web, and then I'll, bring up Acadicus and do some stuff in there. And, and this morning, I have a group that I meet with 10 to 11 Eastern time. We all sit in workrooms and talk about things we're doing in VR. And they're from all over the world, which is just fantastic. And you think about extending that again to the classroom, right? And suddenly you're not geographically limited anymore, right? The guy sitting next to me this morning was in Africa, literally. And we're just sitting there chatting, like we're talking face to face. And, there's just so many mind-blowing elements to it that now I frankly kind of take for granted anymore. But then I feel limited when I go back to those other methods, right? When I, try to just do something on my phone, or I'm, looking at a YouTube video that's that big, versus, I put my headset on and I'm looking at it like I'm at a drive-in, so it's just that I think, where it's going to evolve sooner or later. And I just feel like, that's part of a strategic plan that organizations need to start considering. It's here. We know it. We get references, requests every day to take a look at this. We know if schools aren't yet involved, they're thinking about getting involved.
Yep.
And the ones that are involved, Bill, right? They're thinking about, all right, where are we going next?
Right.
And,
Right.
there is this early mover advantage too, right? I mean, Bill, Madison, really way ahead of the curve at this point, right? And, again, it's going to be part of the curriculum before you know it, while, other folks are kind of just getting started.
Yeah.
Right. And once you kind of dissolve those physical boundaries for where you can accept students, right?
Opens up the door. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, and I think there's like an inflection point that's happening with the schools that adopted early, where you
Mhm.
see there's a growing gap between the new programs that aren't using it and the programs that have a few years in, because the ones that do invest and they have someone like Bill that can help
Mhm.
run simulations and have experience as faculty members, if they make that investment, which isn't always easy, but if they can afford to make that investment, it has a gravitational pull, and it
Mhm.
just grows and grows and snowballs and builds, and then it just quickly becomes like, now I think Bill said 26, 28 programs at Madison College,
Yeah.
or 28 programs at
That's
Madison
amazing.
College. And how many years, it wasn't even that many years ago, we were sitting here talking about maybe someday we could use VR at Madison College. It was just, feels like it was just yesterday. It wasn't that long ago, but when you make that investment, it just snowballs. And now there is the schools like, or Georgia, or Georgian Tech, where Rob is working up in
Yeah.
Canada. That was another program that early on invested in it. And now just look at, they've got 480 some headsets going. And I mean, it pulls away because it works, And so now there's this real growing gap between programs that have these robust VR programs and the programs that are still just kind of kicking the tires. So
Yeah, we're only our XR Center is only 2 years old. Our XR Center is only 2
two
years old.
years.
That's something I always have to remind myself, because we had our grand opening on May 4th of 2023. And I always have to remind myself of that every day when I'm in there, and working through all of these programs, that I'm just like, this is only 2 years in. That's all this is. This is 2 years. And we've got 28 programs, and we started out with three. We didn't start out with 5, 6, 10, whatever. We started out with three, and one of them was me, EMS. It was me. So kind of not fair there, but it was EMS, nursing, and respiratory therapy were our first three. And I mean, there was another instructor, our marketing instructor, Steve Knoll, who had been doing some stuff. He was doing some standalone stuff with our Quest ones. So he was working, but he wasn't doing anything. Like, he wasn't coming to me for anything,
Mhm.
because at that point he knew way more than I did. So I was just like, I don't know, go get them. There they are. And we would charge the headsets for them. That was about it. But now, we've got 28 programs, and that's the other thing is we have made it so that we are invaluable to the college. we've made it so that the college goes, yeah, this is our program. We have to have this. We need this. Whereas, if I had just stayed in the EMS realm and just kept teaching in EMS, sure, EMS would have said, yeah, we need this. But at the same time, EMS probably would have gone, yeah, we need this, but I don't know how we afford this. Right. And so, that was the thing, was to have more than one program getting involved in it. Share it with nursing, share it with EMS, share it with dental, share it with everybody,
Yeah,
and take people to lunch and shake hands. John, I
yeah.
That's
completely
right.
agree.
Build a network.
Yeah,
Build
I
a network.
completely agree with that meeting in person. And I am the guy who
Mhm.
really, at Madison College, brought this idea of Classroom Live, what we do now, to it. It was myself, Carly, Alan Natachu, bringing this in. And I still say there is a huge benefit to being in person. There's a huge benefit to being in person. And when you can be in person, that's amazing. I did my master's degree online, University of South Florida, so it wasn't like, some weird program or something, but we still had a week where we had to come in and meet in person. So yeah, meeting in person is great. And I think that virtual reality, Rick, you just mentioned it, virtual reality is a great way to do it. I mean, you're meeting people that you would have never met before. You're getting
Exactly.
knowledge from people you would have never known before. So, uh,
Just want to mention while Sean's here that I think we heard multiple times coming up that people were very impressed with the quality of our customer support. And Sean is not customer support. Sean is our core developer. He does all the programming on platform, but he's been stepping up and doing a lot of work with customer experience, as is Rick and Mitch. And, you guys are just fantastic. And I think we've heard a lot about that from a lot of the people that were at the conference, that if someone had a question, somebody would raise their hand, what about this? What if we have a question? And, it was just like, well, we've got how many different support, we've got a Discord channel, we've got a support ticket system you can send an email to, you can reach out to us directly through email. There's so many ways to reach out to us. So a lot of that has to do with Sean and the work he's doing. And of course, Rick. And yeah, we've got a great customer experience team, and we're going to keep on going with that. So
Mhm.
I think we've always seen that as a really important part of making this work, is if the customers are investing in buying the platform, we want to make sure it's working for them. So if they've got a question, like even like there was one person had a question, and I told them that if you send that to the support ticket, sometimes people think if they send an email to a support desk, like, well, it's just getting fired into some like random folder somewhere, and someday you'll get back to me. But I always tell, like, not at Acadicus. If we get a support ticket, it is all hands on deck. Like, we all are looking at that and making sure that we get that resolved as fast as we can. So.
Yeah, I get that little ping on my phone and I'm like, what? Okay, let's take a look here. I mean, it's typically same day within hours.
Yeah, usually almost real time. Yep. Yep. Cool. Yeah, I guess that's the main thing I wanted to talk about today, was that summit. It was surreal for me. I had no idea what to expect, but it was surreal. I didn't know what I was getting into. I really didn't. When we went up there, I had no idea what this was going to be. But when Kevin, I think one of the first things we asked, who all here is using Acadicus, and saw all those hands go up, it just hit me viscerally. I almost started crying, to be honest with you. It was like really humbling,
That's it.
and then just to hear all their stories, and it just like, and I told somebody, I think it was Karen at Northwood, I was talking to her, and I said, the thing about, building this platform is that, in any technology or any vocation, any kind of career path, you have ups, you have downs, you have good days, you have bad days. But being a part of a community like this and building something like a catechist, the bad days are never that bad. You really don't, because you're lifted by all the wonderful things all these people are doing. And it doesn't, you can even have one of the worst days outside of the context of work, and you're just not feeling great or whatever for any reason, but something will come along where I'll get an email from somebody and, hey, I just want to let you know, I found that I could use this asset and combine it with this thing. And we had, 30 students ran through, and we did a survey, and they all loved it. And we're going to integrate it into the program next semester. And well, lo and behold, like suddenly I'm feeling great, and it just like, it makes my day. So I hear that kind of stuff all the time, and I love it. So yeah, being there, that was surreal. That was amazing. I want to do it again. I want to definitely have, we can cast a bigger net too. I think, like I was thinking, even like all the folks at UW that are using it, Dr. McAdams and his team. I think Dr. Slayman wouldn't hesitate to fly out to a conference like this if it was, if he knew ahead of time what we were going to be doing. I think there's a lot of folks. Dr. Oviawe, I think, would be very excited to join and just get together in person. There's a lot going on, and we can compare notes and learn a lot. So
I think
looking forward
that's
to the
telling
next one.
too, John. I don't know about you guys, but I seem to feel like, in my LinkedIn feeds and other social media, I'm seeing a lot more of these XR conferences for education pop up. Like this interest is really peaking and people are like, wanting to get together and see what everybody's doing. Again, it's
Yep.
become this, almost inevitable tool, and everybody wants to understand, how everybody else is using it. And I'm seeing all these, like almost every month, it seems like, right? Ohio State had a conference, and something in Florida, and of course IMSH every year, and I think Georgian did something. So yeah, I mean, a lot of interest.
It's definitely growing fast. Well, cool. Is there anything left unsaid that we want to talk about? Or did we cover everything?
Do we have to go back and talk about hybrid snakes?
Yeah, we gotta end like we began. Trying to think of if there's any other dimensions to
God.
that. That was a great story. That was a fantastic story. I had like, and there wasn't a picture of it. You had pictures of the other stuff, but not the
Right.
snake breeder. So like I've got a very overactive imagination. So like when I was imagining Bill as the snake breeder, I have to say, I love that you clarified that you were just introducing them. That was your role.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
that was clarity that I think we all needed to hear. That was
Yep.
Well, there's definitely a link there with what treating phobias in VR, right? Where
Right, there you go.
Introduce, if
There you
you're
go.
freaky about snakes, right?
Yeah.
There's probably something out there that can kind of
Yeah.
help cure you with that.
Bill Ballo's snake breeder VR experience.
I was trying to remember if we have any snakes in Acadicus.
We need a snake asset, Sean.
We do. We do.
I could swear we have one somewhere, but I can't remember what packet would be in. I don't remember how or where. Maybe not.
I know we have
but
mice and cats and dogs and trying to think what else.
We
I
need
don't think
snakes.
we have a snake. Yeah, we need some
We need
snakes.
some
We need a
snakes.
bunch of snakes. Yeah. All right, guys. This is great. Have a great weekend. Thanks for coming. We'll see you next Friday.
All right.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.